The following podcast is an exclusive presentation of Project Entertainment Network.
Hey folks, Brian Keene here. You know, summer's over. We're entering the fall and then the winter. Halloween's coming up, Thanksgiving, and then, of course, the holiday shopping season. Speaking of the holiday shopping season, let me tell you about subculturecorsets.com. They've got everything you need for everyone on your list for this holiday season. Clothing, accessories, gifts, books, you name it, they've got it. They sponsor every show on the Project Entertainment Network, including this one. So please give them your business. Visit subculturecorsets.com.
What
kind of stars can you hear each week on the Curtain Jerkers Wrestling Podcast? Booker Max Burton proceeds over our panel of wrestling analysts. Ring announcer Walter Ball. South Florida Indie correspondent Steve Mesa. Northeast Indie correspondent the Viking Brian Burton. Classic feuds dissected. Indie rivalry and common sense. It's the stable that shoots while it works. Fridays at 6:05 on Superstation PEN on the Curtain Jerkers Wrestling Podcast.
There shall come a podcast like no other. Defenders Dialogue with Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Marvel Comics' original superhero non-team convenes once again. The Incredible Hulk, the Savage Submariner, the Master of the Mystic Arts, Doctor Strange, and a dynamic supporting cast of Marvel superheroes battle against evil as the Defenders. Without further ado, true believers, here's your hosts, Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Excelsior!
Hi, welcome back to Defenders Dialogue. I'm Brian Keene.
And I am Christopher Golden.
And Chris, what is it you always say right around this time?
I don't even remember, Brian. What do I always say? Do I say Natch? Do I say my name is Stan the Man? No.
I believe it begins with an E.
I honestly think that Excelsior is gone from my brain because I've read the Headmen, or much of the Headmen saga, in the last 24 hours, and I can't even think. Well, Excelsior, true believers!
Welcome back to the dynamic Defenders Dialogue. This week's episode is brought to you by The Christmas Cards by John Urbansick and Mariette Lesher. Chris, you know what? The holidays are coming. So maybe it's time to take a break from all this horror in our entertainment, horror in our world politics, and instead of that, we should try some of John Urbansick's Christmas stories. He's teamed up with artist Mariette Lesher, and what they've produced is a beautiful, beautiful book of Christmas stories and illustrations. You'll find your traditional reindeer and Christmas seals and angels and snowmen, but you'll also find sentient snowflakes and elves and fairies and Christmas ghosts. You'll find out what Santa does during the summer. This collection is great for families, for children of every age, and it makes an excellent gift. So there's no reason not to get a dozen copies to fill some stockings. You can read John Urbansick's Tales of Horror and Wonder all year round. This is the season for his Christmas cards. The Christmas Cards by John Urbansick and Mariette Lesher is available right now on Amazon.com.
That's crazy.
It is crazy.
I think that, people should celebrate Christmas in the most horrific ways imaginable. It puts me in mind, and this is not the show. We're supposed to talk about Defenders, but it does put me in mind, Brian. And yes, absolutely, people go and buy John's book. But after you have done that, another terrific, horrific Christmas tale that I have never been able to get out of my brain in all the years it's been since I've read it, is Robert Devereaux's classic Santa Steps Out.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you think Twisted, John Urbansick and Robert Devereaux will change your mind. In any case,
I believe Santa Steps Out is available in a real nice trade paperback edition from Deadite Press for less than $10. So
really,
yeah,
somebody should
definitely
send me
pick that up
for Christmas. Listen, Brian, today is a momentous day.
Why is that?
This is the day when we get to talk about your first comic book.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We're going to cover what we hope will be issues 31 through 34 of the Defenders. Those are collected in Volume 5 of the Marvel Masterworks. And Chris, you are absolutely right. This episode includes not only the very first Defenders comic I ever read, but the very first comic book I ever read.
For those people who are reading along with us for this show, I think that a lot of the inner world of Brian Keene can be gleaned from reading that one issue and understanding that it was your first comic book.
It was my first comic book, and there have been a lot of things that have had a formative impact on me. Stephen King's The Stand and Night Shift, Joe Lansdale's The Drive-In, the early works of the Splatterpunks. But nothing has impacted me like issue Defenders 32 did. And that's not hyperbole, and it's not just a bit for the air. Yes, everything about me can be traced back to this comic book.
Oh, it explains so much.
It does. Hey, before we get to that, though,
yeah.
did you want to talk a little bit about Twisted Book of Shadows? I mean, you have a platform here to do it.
Yeah, because this is Defenders Dialogue, and I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it here, but I just will say, do a search for the Twisted Book of Shadows. Jim Moore and I are doing something that's more of a mission than an anthology, really. The nutshell version, Brian, is that you and I both grew up on reading anthologies from Charles L. Grant and Stuart Schiff and Frank Coffey and Ramsey Campbell and Dark Forces from Kirby McCauley and all these. And sure, they had a lot of famous names in them. But especially in the case of Charlie Grant, they also had a ton of people I had never heard of before. Charlie
Absolutely.
gave a lot of people their first opportunity. And I've edited a ton of anthologies at this point. And I've rarely been, I've tried to fit in, sort of people here and there, but I've rarely been in the position to give a broad platform to a bunch of people that are not that familiar to the typical horror anthology reader. And it's always stuck in my craw that in order these days, it's so hard, almost virtually impossible to sell an anthology. And every time I sell one, I think it's probably the last one I'll ever sell. It's such a miracle to a mainstream publisher, I should say. And so the Twisted Book of Shadows is the result of that. And what Jim and I have done is we're working with John McElveen at Haverhill House Publishers, and we've created a GoFundMe to raise enough money so that we're going to do the Twisted Book of Shadows as a totally blind submission process. We want anyone who's interested, who's a horror writer. We don't care who you are. We don't care what your name is. There are no spaces for marquee names. We will not know who you are when you send the stories in. We are working with an editorial committee because one of the things we're committed to here is encouraging diverse voices in horror to submit to us, so that it's not, and one of the reasons we're doing it blind is because we don't want to be tempted by the idea of, well, this person's well known, and that'll help sell copies. So we brought in Billy Martin, and Lee Thomas and Lamar Giles and Linda Addison and Cale Pereira, Gabino Iglesias, Rachel Autumn Deering, Nadia Balkin. We brought in this great editorial committee of people who are diverse voices in horror to read along with us. And all these people are basically volunteering their time. And Jim and John McElveen and I are putting in some of our own money. We're committing some of our own money to the budget instead of us getting paid, because we want this thing to be an opportunity for writers of all stripes who are interested in horror to submit stories to be considered blindly. And this way, we're going to choose our stories, and we're going to be able to pay people pro rates. And that's basically what it comes down to. So if this sounds appealing to you as a writer, as a reader, if you want to support the idea that there should be a market like this, please go and drop $10, $25, whatever you can afford to our GoFundMe. We're a third of the way to our goal of $6,000, and we could really use your help.
Awesome. And I think we're going to have you on my podcast, The Horror Show with Brian Keene, next week.
Awesome.
To talk about this as well. So I'll interview you about it on there. That way we can talk here about the Defenders.
Yeah, I'm sorry to go on so much, but I want to get the concept across. But yes,
no,
we should
I
be
agree.
talking about the Defenders.
I agree, and seriously, round of applause to you guys for doing this. I think it's fucking awesome, and I encourage everybody listening to contribute if you can. Even if it's just $1. If 6,000 people each contribute $1, you guys are funded.
Exactly.
So.
4,000. We're $2,000 there. And that's exactly it. I mean, anyway, let's talk about the Defenders.
Let's. Now, listeners, if you're longtime listeners, you've already met Nebulon, the Celestial Man. You've already met the Headmen. In fact, when on an earlier episode, when the Defenders first met the Headmen, that was back in Defenders issue number 21. We talked about that last panel. Where Nighthawk and Valkyrie and Doctor Strange and the Hulk are standing around after their battle with the Headmen, and Doctor Strange wonders, has this all been but a prelude to the weirdest menace we've ever faced? Well, yes, Doc, it has. This is that weirdest menace.
This is rereading these issues, and we'll say Defenders number 31, written by Gerber, art by Sal Buscema and Jim Mooney. Reading these issues, Brian, there seems no question that Gerber was high as fuck when he wrote these. I just never mind the fact that this issue number 31 is called Nighthawk's Brain. If you think that's weird, it gets so weird. And
it does.
We talk about Tom Snigoski almost every episode, and this is where Snigoski, I think, lost his interest in this comic. Although I think he read it all through. He probably still owns them all. And I don't understand that, because to me, as crazy as this is, we talked so much about the familial elements and how great the character work is that Gerber does. And I think it's to Gerber's credit, the crazier and in many cases stupider it gets, the more engaged I am.
Agreed. Because it all comes down to characterization and Gerber's craftsmanship. That this is not a superhero team. This is a family, a loose-knit family of misfits.
Exactly.
Who stay together because they don't have anybody else. It's also worth noting from the historic perspective, this storyline, which it never really had a name. It's not like the Dark Phoenix saga or Civil War. So we're gonna refer to it here as the Headmen Nebulon saga, but it spans the entirety of Marvel Masterworks Volume 5.
Right.
And it takes these weird side trips and these weird subplots, but all of Marvel Masterworks Volume 5 is devoted to the storyline. In going back through my Bronze Age stuff and looking, I believe up until this point, this might be the longest semi-self-contained storyline that had run in a Marvel comic. Now, in the years that followed, of course, we'd have much longer works. I think maybe Bendis's Disassembled on the Avengers, his early days on the Avengers might have been the longest if you stack. I don't know. Well,
that might be the longest, but the one that felt the longest was Chris Claremont's interminable Excalibur cross-time caper story arc.
Yeah.
In any case.
But yeah, this is super long. We're not going to cover it in just one or two episodes. We will see the return of Luke Cage and the Son of Satan to the Defenders ranks. We'll see the introduction of Red Guardian and Howard the fucking Duck to the ranks. We'll see Jack Norris become much more proactive. Indeed, we'll see Jack Norris become a superhero.
Well, I have to tell you, and then we should launch into it, that really interestingly to me, Brian, and I still haven't because I haven't gotten to the end of the Masterworks yet, I had never read Marvel Treasury Edition number 12. I still have never read it.
Really?
So, it's joyful to me that that I'm going to be able to read a Defenders comic that I have never read, and that it's drawn by my favorite artist of all time, Gene Colan.
That's right.
All right, so we open with Nighthawk having a nightmare that helpfully recaps basically his history and all of the things that he is moaning about all the time.
Yep, we see Trish Starr now with only one arm appearing before him like some siren out of Greek mythology, and she's asking him, "Why, Kyle? Why did you let it happen?"
And then, of course, he smashes his head into a tree because, and here's stupid thing number one, Nighthawk has fallen asleep while flying.
Right.
Come on now.
See, I don't think that's so stupid.
Come on.
I mean, people fall. Remember, Gerber is trying to humanize these characters.
You will go down the street and around the corner to make it.
No! How many people fall asleep behind the wheel of their car? Mary San Giovanni fell asleep behind the wheel of her car this year.
Yeah, but where is he flying to and from that's such a long distance that he's fallen asleep? He's got a jetpack on his back, and he falls asleep while flying. All right.
I can tell you where he's flying from, because I have the previous Marvel Masterworks right here. He's flying home after that battle with Tommy Two-Tone, or whatever the magic tap dancer was in the last.
Yeah, no, he's not, because that's a fill-in issue and it doesn't count.
Anyway, yes, he slams into a tree. He chides himself for falling asleep while flying, and then Gorilla Man pops out and zaps him with a tranquilizer dart, and the Headmen have captured Nighthawk.
Well, both the first time I read this comic and the most recent time I read this comic, for half a second when I saw that gun come from off panel, I thought it was the dwarf, the elf with a gun, and I was very sad that it was Gorilla Man. But in any case, then we cut to a carnival where Jack Norris and Valkyrie are on a date. I love the fact that she goes on dates with Jack Norris in her full Valkyrie regalia.
Yeah.
And no one bats an eye, which I love. But this is one of my favorite scenes with them, in the sense of, Jack is trying to, he's threatened by how strong she is and how little she needs him. So he goes to that classic carnival game where he wants to swing a mallet and ring the bell, and he does that, and it makes him feel like a champ. He wins a doll for her, and she's like, what the hell do I need that for?
What need has a warrior woman for a cloth representation of a rabbit?
That should be a T-shirt. It's the new "Ask Me About My Feminist Agenda." So then Valkyrie takes a turn, and of course she shatters the whole mechanism. And then her next line is my favorite of the issue. "If I understand the workings of these games, you now owe me an animal. Isn't that correct?"
So the proprietor of this carnival attraction is not pleased that Valkyrie has destroyed his machine. So Jack grabs her by the wrist and tries to get her to flee with him. And, of course, Valkyrie resists this. And, we get a nice little recap there of their relationship problems. And you really feel for Jack Norris here, because he's trying. He says, "I'm trying to accept you. I just wonder, can you do the same for me?"
Yeah, it's very interesting because she admits that she's attracted to him. But I like the line in the previous panel. She says, "Boon or curse, that is my nature, and you must accept me as I am." So she's basically saying, she's not telling him to go away. So I think it's interesting. Again, this is that unlikely thing where she realizes that, she's seeing it from his perspective. He is technically her husband.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting. And
if that was your favorite scene.
Oh, no, that wasn't my favorite scene. That was my favorite line.
Oh, okay.
The one earlier in the page. But yes, my friend, I know what you're going to say. So go ahead with the best page, perhaps in the entirety of the early run of the Defenders.
We open with a 9-panel grid, classic 9-panel grid as epitomized in Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' Watchmen. But we're in the Ozarks in southern Missouri on a game reserve, very specifically posted, no hunting. Okay, it's a game reserve. And the foliage parts, and we see Hulk, that classic Sal Buscema artwork, line work. The Hulk is happy. He's smiling. We haven't seen him like this in his own comic book, but we have seen him like this in the Defenders once before when he was playing jump rope with the children during their initial meeting with the Headmen. And here we see him smiling again because he's watching a mommy deer and her baby fawn. But then, unfortunately, tragedy strikes. 2 poachers have snuck onto the game land, and they kill the mommy. And the baby fawn refuses to leave its mother's side. And all of a sudden, the Hulk comes rampaging out of the greenery, shouting, "Men killed Bambi's mother."
And one would assume he hasn't seen the movie. But he certainly is aware of Bambi, because I think he'd be noticeable in a movie theater for the duration of Bambi. But at that point, he has his way. Well, I shouldn't say it that way. He takes down these 2 hunters. He grabs one gun. He knocks one guy down, and then he picks the other guy up, and he skips him across the pond like a stone. Head
first into a tree.
Yeah, head first into a tree, which is only what they deserve.
Right.
Because after all...
It's interesting. In the 70s, now, of course, everybody will remember Peter David's classic run on the Hulk when Banner was separated from the Hulk, and we were left with this animalistic Hulk, who ended up doing some horrific things. He ripped an airliner full of civilians out of the sky. He landed on the White House lawn and told Bill Clinton, "From now on, anytime you attack me, you lose a city." But in 70s Marvel, you rarely saw him attacking civilians. It was always some super monster or super villain. And even when you did, you didn't really see the violence. Here on this page in the Defenders, we see the violence. I mean, it couches, the dialogue in the caption boxes, they kind of shy away from saying these 2 hunters are dead. But, I mean, if you look at the violence depicted, there's no question in my mind, Hulk just killed these 2 guys.
Well, I think it's the 70s. I never felt like they were dead, although the guy who goes headfirst into a tree after being skipped across the surface of the water, he's definitely not okay. But you're right. It's funny because, Hulk, when Banner gets angry, he turns into the Hulk. But once he's the Hulk in the 70s, and even in the latest Thor Ragnarok appearance of the Hulk, he's not a rage monster.
Right.
So that is a later development. It is right. It is interesting to me. But
Hulk takes the baby deer and he tells the baby deer that he will be its friend.
Yep.
And he will take care of Bambi. He names the baby Bambi. But he doesn't know how to take care of a baby deer, so he's going to go find a smart person to tell him how.
Yep. Yeah, that was great.
He bounds off with the deer, and then we transition to Nighthawk waking up, pinned down on an operating table, surrounded by the Headmen, Negan and Jerry and Chandu.
And let's take a moment to appreciate. And again, rather than go through like this, this too much, let's just take a moment to appreciate how much of this story, without Buscema and Mooney's art, making it, sort of tangibly real. This is so sort of like 1940s, 1950s B-movie, like, they've got Nighthawk strapped to a table. This frickin' gorilla man who, remind people, Arthur Negan has a human head on a gorilla's body.
Right.
And he's basically dramatically explaining that they're going to take, Chandu the Mystic's brain and swap it with Nighthawk's brain.
Right.
And then he says, Nighthawk says, but what about my brain? Oh, that. Well, unless we find some use for it, I imagine we'll simply toss it away.
Right.
And it's so cheesy, but I'm totally with it. I'm on board.
Oh, it works. And you know what else I love about the Headmen? Any other gathering of supervillains, a group of supervillains, they call each other by their code names. Okay, Shocker, are you ready? I sure am, Electro. Not so with the Headmen. They call each other by their regular civilian names. Jerry, Negan, and Chandu.
Right. Yep.
So
Love
we transition again. We have a strange interlude on the Strip in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, way back in the middle of the Sons of the Serpent saga, Defenders issue number 25, if you'll remember, we told you about another similar interlude at a trailer park in California, where Tom Pritchett was serenading his wife, Linda. Suddenly there's a knock on their trailer door. Tom goes to the door, and there's an elf with a gun, and he kills Tom. And it didn't seem connected to anything that was going on in the story at that time, the Defenders fight with the Sons of the Serpent. And we told you would see the elf again. Well, here we are, fast forward now to Defenders issue number 31 in Las Vegas. Two folks from Oklahoma, Charles Lester and his wife, they're complaining because they've lost all their money. Now they're on their way back to Oklahoma.
Charles Wizzo Lester.
Yeah. They get into a cab. The cab turns down an alley, at which point they discover that the cab driver is just a dummy. It's just a mannequin. And its head springs off, and the elf with a gun climbs out of the mannequin's chest and looks like he kills Charles.
Well, I'm sure he kills them both.
Yeah.
Here's the one thing I want to say to our dear listeners, whoever they may be, those who are still hanging on with us, and folks, we've got many more episodes to go. Brian is going to pretend this is not really fucking stupid. But the idea that the cab is being driven, let's remember that the cab pulls up, it's being driven, and then pulls away with them in the back seat. And when Charles taps the driver on the shoulder, the driver's head springs off, and the elf with gun climbs out of inside the dummy. So who knows what magic or tech is afoot in making that possible?
Well, as Stuart Moore says in the introduction to this volume, Steve Gerber was famous for improvising his storylines. He said, unlike some of my colleagues, I do not plot my stories months and months in advance. In fact, the next issue blurb at the end of each story is always the most difficult line for me to write. So, when it comes to the elf with a gun, as Stuart Moore goes on to write, this diminutive psychopath popped up in several issues, always on his own isolated page, killing a single seemingly innocent civilian. There was no explanation and barely any connection to the book's central plot lines. That fits right in with the mannequin driving the taxi cab.
All right. So, Hulk is still leaping through the air with Bambi, and he encounters Nighthawk. And although Hulk jumps rather than flies, he manages to have a conversation in midair with Nighthawk, who, of course, is actually Chandu the Mystic. Chandu the Mystic's brain inside Nighthawk's body. So keep up, folks, because there are going to be a lot more twists with the brain and who's in whose body at this point.
We want to stress that again. It's going to become a game of musical chairs. Actually make that musical
brains. Musical minds. There you go.
Yeah. For right now, we have Kyle Richmond, Nighthawk. His body is inhabited by Chandu the Mystic's brain and Chandu's consciousness. Yes. Now, we don't know where Kyle is at this point.
Right.
Where his brain is. But, yeah, he's having a conversation with the Hulk. They're on their way to the magician's house to help Bambi. We meanwhile see what I think is a really touching two-panel scene of Doctor Strange creating these two human figures out of flame to amuse himself. It's a man and a woman, and they're running toward each other, passionate and in love. And then Wong interrupts his recreation time and tells him that, he has guests. Doctor Strange comes out into the foyer, and, Hulk has the baby deer. But before Hulk can explain to him, Nighthawk picks up a sculpture. And he says, "Pardon me, before you two get absorbed in the fun, this sculpture, it's a genuine pre-cataclysmic artifact, isn't it?" And Doctor Strange is puzzled because Kyle Richmond has never before shown, any interest in esoteric art, let alone, something with mystical connotations.
Yeah, any knowledge of the occult. But Brian, the best line, and again, a lot of this stuff speaks for itself, but the best line on this page is when Hulk interrupts them and says, "Enough talk about stupid rock. Men killed Bambi's mother."
And Jack Norris and Valkyrie walk in at that point, and Jack says, "Good grief, Doc. Don't tell me you took him to the movies."
Anyway,
but
all right.
Here we have, Hulk rely. He even says, Valkyrie and Doctor Strange will know what to do for the baby deer. Before they can, however, Chandu,
in Nighthawk's body,
paralyzes the defenders and then departs. As soon as he leaves, Doctor Strange flicks his finger and says, "Paralyzed indeed." He says he was a third-rate sorcerer, but obviously it's not Nighthawk. We need to find out what's happened to the real Nighthawk. So the four of them, Doctor Strange, Valkyrie, Hulk, and Jack Norris, I think it's important to point out, and Jack, he's now a member of the Defenders after the whole Guardians of the Galaxy thing. They go off in search of what's happened to the real Nighthawk. They leave Bambi behind in the Sanctum Sanctorum.
Yeah. We'll fly through this battle scene, Brian,
right?
Because basically, Doctor Strange, they catch up with quote unquote Nighthawk. Doctor Strange knocks him into some parallel dimension where they do mystical battle. Doctor Strange easily bests him, of course. I do want to point out when Chandu in the body of Nighthawk says, "I ask no mercy, I am your match, I can defeat you," which is like David and Goliath, although David wins, so never mind. He says, "In the name of dread Nilrak." Now, I can only think, and I'd have to go back and look to see what year this is and what year Mike Carlin started working in comics. But Nilrak being Carlin backwards gives me pause. I thought that was interesting. I don't know. I should have done my homework, Brian, but I didn't.
Right.
In any case, Doctor Strange then takes Nighthawk, carries him back, assuming this is someone else in Nighthawk's costume, that someone is disguised as Nighthawk, until he is unmasked and they realize it is Kyle Richmond, and they're all very puzzled.
Dun, dun, dun. Which takes us right into issue number 32, titled Musical Minds. Chris, I misspoke at the start of the show. Issue 32 is not my first issue. It's issue 33.
Oh, okay. So, all right. Well, then I take it all back because I was all excited thinking that the first page of your first ever comic featured Damon Hellstrom's Son of Satan in art. It's also, again, Gerber, Buscema, Mooney, and it's such a great page with Damon Hellstrom trying to exorcise what they presume is the possessed body of Nighthawk, with Doctor Strange and Val and Hulk and Jack looking on. I love that page, and of course they they wake Chandu, but Damon Hellstrom determines he is not possessed.
Right. It is, in fact, Chandu's brain inside Kyle Richmond's body.
Well, it takes them another couple of pages for Doctor Strange to use the Eye of Agamotto,
right,
to determine that. Yeah, and then of course Hulk says, Birdnose has new face. Hulk doesn't like this face. Face is ugly. Hulk can tell. Face hates Hulk. This is the best part of this show. Just reading Hulk dialogue from Steve Gerber.
It is. Jack Norris recognizes Chandu's face. He's seen him at the Vermont State Fair. And Dr. Strange agrees that this is indeed Harvey Schlemmerman, a.k.a. Chandu the Mystic.
That was my favorite bit when rereading this. Harvey Schlemmerman. He seemed pretty impressive when he was Chandu the Mystic. But once he's Harvey Schlemmerman, a magician from the Maine State Fair, or the Vermont State Fair, somehow the menace is no longer real.
Which leads Hulk to ask the question on everybody's mind: if Chandu's brain is in Nighthawk's body, then where is Birdnose? Well, as we find out on the next page, Kyle's brain is sitting in a bowl.
All right, folks.
No body, no sensors, just his brain is being kept alive in a bowl.
All right, and wait, let me stay in here. And I know we really should have had Snegoski on for this episode. Because this page, I think, these next two pages, is probably where the whole series goes off the rails for Tom Snegoski. But it's where I feel like whatever Gerber was smoking got really good. Because not only is Gorilla Man, with his gorilla hands touching the exposed brain, or about to touch the exposed brain of Kyle Richmond, which is in a bowl of some kind of chemical solution. I'm going to say jump ahead, which, by the way, folks, the brain stays in the bowl for issues to come.
Yes.
And goes through all kinds of adventures with people carrying it around. But then we meet the newest member of the Headmen, Ruby.
That's right. Now she has
Brian, explain Ruby, and then I have a question for you.
Okay. She has a noticeably female body. It was the Bronze Age of Marvel Comics, so she's dressed a little more formally than Red Sonja or Shauna the She-Devil, but not much. But keep in mind, this group is the Headmen, so instead of a head, she has a ruby-colored crystal ball as a head. It is a computer, an organic computer composed of malleable plastic, able to assume whatever shape she desires. So basically, her head is John Carpenter's The Thing.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it, because on a molecular level, every cell in her head is brain. She explains later. So right. I'm saying that now because Gerber's making this shit up as he goes, trying to explain what Ruby's head is. What we see on this 2-page spread is that we see her head transform into a representation of
Jerry Morgan.
Jerry Morgan with the Sharpay face. And then we see her head extrude scarlet tentacles and grab him. So essentially her head is a bit like Green Lantern's ring as well, in that it can be anything, do anything that Steve Gerber decides it can do. I find the whole thing interesting, Brian, because there is no story, and this is my challenge to Brian Keene, is to write the origin of Ruby, because how did she transfer her consciousness from her original brain into her computer, John Carpenter's The Thing head? How did it move from one to the other? And then how did she get it on her body in place of her original head? That story.
We get to that in a later issue of The Defenders.
I don't remember that. Well, all right. Well, then, folks, read along with us, because we're going to discover how this absolute lunacy happened.
Yep, it's after Gerber's run, before J.M. DeMatteis's run. I can't remember the issue number, but we do get that explained to us.
All right.
So yeah. Meanwhile, Doctor Strange and Jack and Valkyrie and Hulk, they're searching for Kyle. Doctor Strange has his crystal ball, and he finds Kyle at sort of this crossroads in limbo somewhere, which is a nice segue to. Wait a minute. Did we skip a page here?
No. And this is
Okay.
there are a couple of times when this happens, by the way, because I noticed in the reading, and I was going to point out that we go from where is Bird Nose. That's later. Okay, so then we get back to Doctor Strange using the orb of Agamotto to find Kyle. Yeah, no, we didn't skip a page.
Okay. What I'm gonna do then, I'm gonna spoil it for people. Because I just realized, it's explained on the first page of issue 33, which is the first issue I ever read. We see the Defenders fly off. Doc says, I have a plan of sorts, but I shall require aid. Mr. Norris, are you willing? And Jack says, me? Well, sure, I guess so. And then we see the Defenders fly off. We see Hulk, we see Doctor Strange, we see Valkyrie flying on top of Aragorn, and we see Nighthawk. But
he's flying like he's drunk.
Yeah. And then we segue into that other version of Nighthawk who is in limbo, standing at the crossroads.
We're inside Kyle Richmond's consciousness.
Right. What we get, and I don't know that we need to do it blow by blow, we get a multi-page recap of Kyle Richmond's origins, his childhood. It's very similar, as we've discussed before, it's very similar to the Batman origin.
But what's interesting about this, actually, and reading this, I'm glad I had never read this when I first was reading Nighthawk, because for those who are not reading along with us, Nighthawk's youth is that of a absolute douchebag.
Yes.
He was picked on. His mother, and it's sad. Yes, it's horribly sad. His mother died. His father dumped him at West Haven boarding school for boys. He was teased by kids who he then beat the crap out of, and then he was basically an asshole forever. Spoiled brat, goes to college. Because his father buys his way in. But then is totally irresponsible his whole life. The one thing that I thought was really interesting, Brian, is he has something similar to Doctor Strange here, in that he has this car accident. And I didn't realize, I don't think, that it seems to imply here at least, that the car accident kills his college girlfriend.
Yes.
Mindy.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So then he's thrown out of college. He tries to join the government attempts to draft him to send him to Vietnam, but they can't take him because he's got a heart murmur. And again, I'm just recapping this whole thing for people. The heart murmur, it's in trying to cure himself of his heart murmur that he gets the powers that give him double the strength of a man at night. He talks about it, he becomes a villain, then he becomes a member of the Defenders. So basically, up until the point where Trish Starr is disfigured by the bomb and Pennyworth turns out to be financing the Sons of the Serpent with Kyle Richmond's money, even though he's already a superhero and a Defender, up to this point, he's never really, sort of done anything.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So that's the interesting, to me, sort of the interesting background.
I agree. So we leave Kyle still standing there at the crossroads in limbo, reflecting on his life, and we move on to Westbury, Connecticut, where the Defenders are arriving. Hulk tells them he's been here before. Doctor Strange doubts that, but you listeners and Chris and I, we know Hulk has been there before. He's been on this street in these suburbs in Westbury, Connecticut, back in issue 21, the first time they encountered the Headmen. They walk up to the Headmen's door. They ring the doorbell. And a woman dressed in robes and radiating light answers the door and says, "Enter and be at peace. Whatever power has brought you to me, know that you are welcome in this abode of love." And as they start to enter the house, her head explodes without a sound, and the quartet tumble backward, falling insensate to the floor. Then the fragments of her head reassemble, and we find out that this was, in fact, Ruby. So not only can she mimic other people's faces and grow tentacles out of her head is a fucking bomb.
Because, of course, it is.
Yeah, and with that, the Headmen have captured the Defenders.
Yes.
And now we come to my very first comic book.
Oh, well. Now, again, it becomes even more clear, folks. I should note that Buscema only did layouts on this issue. The finished art is by Mooney, obviously by Gerber, and the cover alone with the Headmen is enough to understand why Brian Keene picked up this comic.
Well, and I want people to understand. The year was 1976. Okay, these days, I have a 9-year-old, and if he never read a comic book, he'd still know who all these characters are. There are cartoons, there are movies, there are video games, there are pajamas.
He wouldn't know who the Headmen are.
No, but I'm talking about superheroes in general.
Yes, I know.
Marvel,
I know, yeah.
Okay. 1976, I have no frame of reference for comic books, let alone superheroes. My only exposure were a series of Topps. You remember Topps, the trading card company?
Yeah.
They did these stickers, and it was Marvel characters with a funny slogan in the word balloon. And a guy on the school bus had one, and it was this green guy who I would find out was the Hulk. So that was the only place I'd seen them. And I'm at the newsstand with my dad. I'd ride along with him, and he's buying a pouch of chewing tobacco and a hunting magazine, and I see this cover to Defenders 33. There's the green guy from that sticker. And he's with some blonde woman with a metal bikini and some guy with a weird cape. And standing behind them are a robot woman with a giant red head and this Dick Tracy-looking villain and a gorilla with a human head. And, Dad, please, can I have a quarter? He gave me 50 cents. So I bought this, and I bought an issue of Captain America. It was Jack Kirby's Mad Bomb saga. And when we got home, I opened up the Defenders first, and I was looking at this page, webbed hands, warm heart. Now, audience, I want to tell you, you're reading this through 6-year-old Brian's eyes. The first words, luscious brown eyes gaze into the orb of Agamotto and flash with furious anger. Lips roll back, bearing gritted, grating teeth. The fawn snarls. So what we have here, first of all, I should point out, this struck me enough that I read it 3 times that night. And on the third reading, I got my parents' dictionary out and started looking up words like luscious so I'd understand what they meant. And then I looked up Agamotto, and to my surprise, it wasn't in the dictionary. But what we have here, we have Bambi, Hulk's pet deer, staring into the crystal ball. And what Bambi sees...
Enraged.
Yeah. What Bambi sees are Valkyrie, Hulk, and Doctor Strange held captive. The Headmen, composed of Ruby, Negan, and Jerry, standing there, and Nighthawk standing with the Headmen, but Nighthawk appearing confused. And, the caption at the bottom says, "All is not what it seems, and the baby deer knows it." And what we get
really, really angry baby deer.
Right. We get a multi-page recap of the last 2 issues, but basically the spoiler warning, what has happened? Doctor Strange has now put Chandu's brain inside.
Consciousness. Chandu's consciousness, yeah. Mind.
Chandu's consciousness is inside the baby deer. Jack Norris's consciousness is inside Nighthawk's body, which still has Chandu's brain inside of it. So Kyle Richmond's body is now inhabited by Chandu's brain,
which is inhabited by Jack Norris's mind. And Jack Norris's body, without any consciousness in it at all, is laid out on a table at Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum.
Right.
So there we go.
Right. So yeah, you got a 4-page recap of that. And I'm 6 years old and I'm reading that recap, and it's the most fascinating shit I've ever read in my life.
And then
there's
well,
a woman with an exploding head.
You had to be 8 or 9, my friend. 1976, you were 8 or 9.
Okay, well, however old I was.
So we then young Brian turns the page, and the furious baby deer is using its mouth to try to turn the knob of a door. It fails miserably, falls on its ass, and then looks around literally like it is one of the dogs from the opening of John Carpenter's The Thing. So fucking pissed.
Right. So then we go back to the Headmen's headquarters, and they're hooking encephalotransmorgifiers to the Defender's head. These will perform a subtle alteration on the Defender's thought process. Basically, it's brainwashing. And we learn that the Headmen still believe that it's Chandu's consciousness in charge of Nighthawk's body, rather than Jack. And Jack is playing along, trying to figure out how the hell am I going to help my friends here?
Jack is playing along poorly, and spoiler warning, he gets even worse at playing along, and the Headmen are too dumb to notice.
Exactly.
But I have to say, Brian, again, it's amazing to me and that you can see what this did to your brain. Because if you think that's crazy, everything that's come before,
this is every novel I've written.
The fact that we get to this next page, it's just like, what the hell is going on here?
There's 2 young people, a man and a woman, and they're out for a romantic canoe ride in the middle of Central Park. And while they're out in this canoe ride, these red reptilian amphibious creatures crawl out of the lagoon and capture them.
Having no connection, as far as we know, to anything else.
Right.
I mean, so we had the elf with a gun last issue, I think, and now it seems to have we've got the deer with Chandu's mind in it, trying to use its mouth to open a door. Now we've got this, and then, Brian, what happens then?
And then they pull these young people under the surface of the water, and a flying saucer emerges from the water and shoots into the sky.
Oh, my God. Anyway, then Jack Norris, pretending to be Chandu the Mystic inside Nighthawk's body, meets Ruby, is horrified, although manages to notice in true Geraldo form, or any other of these guys, true Matt Lauer form, most of you is very attractive. In spite of the fact that her head is a sphere of living computer. In any case, her head turns into a giant pair of lips like the Rolling Stones logo and kisses Nighthawk on the face. And then, as I said before, we have the scene in which Jack Norris does a really, really terrible job of pretending and gets angry at Negan and insists that they all recap their purpose. Each of them recap what their plans are, what they want out of this relationship, so that they'll all spill their guts in true Bond villain form.
Which little Brian appreciated as a reader, because this was my first introduction, not just to the Defenders, but to the Headmen. So
yes, exactly. Well, exactly. So, in those days, they didn't collect comics. You didn't have trade paperbacks, so you needed these kinds of recaps, and there's a lot to recap.
Right.
Then, even better,
we go back to the Sanctum Sanctorum, and Chandu, inside Bambi the deer, escapes
by crashing through the window as if he's the Hulk.
Right.
But not for long, Brian.
Because remember those red aliens who were hanging out beneath the waters of Central Park? They capture Chandu/Bambi and take him to this weird structure on an unidentified island somewhere with a bunch of other captives. A good, diverse cross-section of captives. Human beings. There's a giraffe. There's a horse. There's an elephant and an eagle. There's some kind of weird alien technology inside. And these people are all stunned as to what they're doing there. And then suddenly, the baby deer appears alongside them out of thin air. Another captive. And then, Chris, we go back to the Headmen headquarters, and what happens?
Well, Brian, what happens is something that I don't understand, and maybe it's because, again, I haven't read these in years, and it's still to come. But apparently, the defenders have been brainwashed by Arthur Negan's machine, but when they wake up, we're led to believe that they're supposed to be cooperative. They're not cooperative. They attack the Headmen. Ruby says, I take it they will be docile now that your process has worked. Negan says, no, my dear, that was never the intent, which I don't understand, and hopefully all will be revealed.
It will.
Okay, there we go.
It will. But you also have to remember, when it comes to schemes, I mean, the Headmen created that toxic mind-controlling rain just so they could rob a bank. Or not even a
Yes.
bank, a jewelry store.
They are the worst villains ever.
They are. But basically, the Defenders, they expect the Defenders to wake up not docile, because they want them to be able to use their powers, but they expect them to be on the side of the Headmen. And that doesn't happen at all. Hulk says 8-man hurt Hulk and friends. 8-man made Hulk angry. Doctor Strange quickly conjures some handcuffs of a sort to bind Hulk's hands, and explains to him, no, don't smash anything. We came in peace. Why were we attacked? What was your purpose? And Negan says, well, no matter. You're unharmed and free to go. And Doctor Strange says, well, we're not without Nighthawk's brain, at which point the jig is up. The Headmen know that the Defenders know everything that's happened. A big fight takes place. Even though the Hulk's hands are bound, he can still smash things by using both hands. Valkyrie faces off against Ruby, but once again, the Enchantress's spell prevents her from harming another woman.
And I also want to I want to say, in the middle of this battle, because we're almost done here with this episode and this issue, in the middle of this battle, we see once again a couple called George and June, or Junie.
Now, you'll remember them from Defenders issue 21.
I want to bring this up again because we're going to talk about it next episode, because in the next issue, we see George and Junie again in one of my favorite episodes of this series. In that issue, number 21, their house is destroyed by the Hulk, by accident. The Hulk certainly doesn't do it on purpose. And when the Headmen are living in the house next door, their house is destroyed by the Hulk smashing something, and the whole house collapses around the Headmen and the Defenders. And George is laughing hysterically. His wife is like, his wife and daughter are there. The wife is like, what is wrong with you? Why are you laughing? Poor Dr. Negan was in there, and he basically says he's laughing because the Hulk has done it again, but at least it's not their house this time.
That's right.
He's a little hysterical.
That's right.
We see that Doctor Strange has used his powers to protect them all from the collapsing house. And then,
okay. Doctor Strange says, Nighthawk, behind you. Now remember, Nighthawk is Kyle Richmond's body with Chandu's brain and Jack Norris's consciousness. Okay? And there, behind Kyle Richmond's body, is Kyle Richmond's brain in a bowl.
And again, the fact that it's in a bowl and not some kind of fancy technological thing is my favorite thing about this story. It's in a bowl.
So Jack grabs the bowl with the brain and flees. He flies up into the air, fleeing with the brain. And the Headmen and the Defenders face off for final battle. But before they can, Ruby displays another power. She shoots a giant wad of chewing gum out of her head.
I was going to say goo, but chewing gum is more accurate.
Yeah, I mean, it's pink, it's sticky, and it traps Hulk, Doctor Strange, and Valkyrie, and the Headmen make their escape. Speaking of escapes, we go back to Jack inside Kyle's body with Kyle's brain in the bowl, flying into the sky when suddenly a UFO appears overhead, pulls him inside, and he is welcomed. Welcome, Nighthawk, from my friends the Ludbardites of Zar, and from Nebulon, the Celestial Man. And this last caption box.
And by the way, the Ludbardites are the red amphibian creatures we saw earlier.
That's right, who are apparently working with Nebulon. The last caption is just gorgeous. Jack feels Kyle's stomach fall away. and we can laugh all we want. And Tom Sagoski, if you're listening, I really believe that caption box is what made me become a writer. I mean, up until this point, the only thing I've read is Dr. Seuss, a teeny tiny tale, little golden books. I read this, and the vocabulary is a little more advanced. I haven't even discovered Hardy Boys yet, Chris. This is it, and that panel, Jack feels Kyle's stomach fall away. I remember reading it and rereading it, and I was just like, wow, you can do these things with words. And then I flip back to start reading it again, and I see written by Steve Gerber. And right then it hit me. This is a job you can have as a grown-up. And it put me on the path. I was so lucky. I never got to meet him in person, but I did get to correspond with Steve Gerber a few years before his death. And I told him all this. I said, this is all your fault. But yeah, this was it right here. That issue, the issue we just discussed is what warped my mind.
Well, it does explain a lot. It is, and again, I'm not gonna tell our friend Tom Nagoski and anybody else that it all isn't ridiculous. It is, but it's so much fun, and you're on board so much with these characters that you stay with it. You're just like, you're in it. And even now, at 50 years old, rereading these issues, I loved it.
Yep, I did too.
Absurdity and all.
I think we should stop here.
We're stopping. Yeah, that's it. Yep.
And we've gotten to a good cliffhanger. Nebulon is now back. How do him and the Ludbardites tie in with what's going on with the Headman?
And again, I wish Gerber were still with us for so many reasons, but I'd love to ask him, Ludbardites? It's like he took a bag of Scrabble tiles and just tossed them on the Ludbardites. What is that?
We will find out on next week's episode. I want to remind folks, the holidays are coming, so maybe it's time to take a break from all this horror and try some of John Urbansik's Christmas stories instead. He's teamed up with artist Mariette Lesher, who's been making Christmas horses and dolphins for decades, and now they've teamed up for the Christmas cards. It's available right now on Amazon. It's a collection that is great for families, for children of every age, and it makes an excellent gift. So we encourage you to go purchase one of those, and we thank John for sponsoring this week's show. I also want to remind folks, if you enjoy Defenders Dialogue, Chris has another podcast along with co-hosts Jim Moore and Jonathan Mayberry. That's called Three Guys with Beards. It is also available here on the Project Entertainment Network. And I also have my own podcast. It's called The Horror Show with Brian Keene. I co-host that with Dave Thomas, Mary San Giovanni, and assorted other madmen and madwomen. Chris, I don't know the numbers for Three Guys, so I'm not trying to show you up here. I only have access to my own numbers, but I do want to say last week we reached 200,000 downloads for the year on the horror.
Congratulations! I saw you had posted that.
Yeah.
I'm sure Three Guys with Beards is a fraction of that, Brian. But we love our listeners anyway.
I've always been told that you're the number two on the network. So I don't know that it's a fraction of that.
Well, we'll see. But you're also faithful in putting a show out like we are with Defenders Dialogue. Faithful in making sure you have a show out every week. Three Guys.
Well, yeah, I want to make money.
Well, you know what? we don't do Defenders Dialogue for money, though, Brian.
No, we do not. We do not. We do this for fun. We do it for love. And folks, Chris was worried. He thought I was going to go on about issue 33 for the entire show, and I could have done an entire show about. I can't stress enough the issue we just talked about, issue 33, put me on the path I'm on. It formed my entire life, and I love it, and that is why we do this show every week.
And you know what we say, Brian?
I don't know. What do we say? Have you remembered?
We say Excelsior, true believers. That's
Excelsior,
what we say.
True believers. And just a reminder, Defenders Dialogue is available on iTunes, Android, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Google Play Music, and all other platforms via our network, Project Entertainment. Our engineer is Tommy Clark. Please check out his podcast, The Necrocasticon. And if there's something you want us to cover on Defenders Dialogue, that you have a burning question for us, or anything else you want to talk to us about, send me an email, briankeene@live.com, true believer, and we'll get on that.
And we will see you next week with more of the Headmen Nebulon saga.
That's right. I think we're all bozos in this book next week.
Three Guys with Beards, the Project Entertainment Network store, featuring t-shirts, mugs, stickers, hoodies and more from your favorite Project Entertainment Network podcasts.
Ink Stains Scribbler's Rest.
The Horror Show with Brian Keene. Why not show your loyalty by wearing a cool product from the podcast group and show off to your friends?
It Cooks.
Armcast.
The Mondo Method Monster Attack.
Necrocastical. Go to projectentertainmentnetwork.com and click on the store tab for more details.
The Liars Club podcast. Bizarre.
The Lunch Ladies Book Club.
Matters of Faith.
The Project Entertainment Network store, stacked with stuff from the best podcasts on the internet. The Curtain Jerkers.
Buttercup of Doom.
www.projectentertainmentnetwork.com.
This has been an exclusive presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.